Hey everyone, Alyssa here. This episode of Simply 30 contains some heavy topics that might not be supportive to you or your journey at this time. These include postpartum depression and anxiety, thoughts of suicide and death, as well as miscarriage. While we love the opportunity to share our authentic experiences, the good and the bad, we are also big advocates of protecting and honoring your mental health. If you need to skip this episode, it will be here if you ever want to come back to it. If you or someone you know is experiencing any of these conditions, please know that help is available. We have put some resources in the description that may be useful. Sending you all so much love. Take care. Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Simply 30. My name is Alyssa.
And I'm Danielle.
And I had a baby. So it's been a little while since we've recorded, and even the last episode, we didn't really get to promote much about it because I gave birth like
2 days
later. So welcome back. We're happy to be here. We're going to give you some updates about where we've been in life. And then today I thought I would tell you all a little bit about my experience giving birth, and then, how it's been 7 weeks. My daughter is 7 weeks today. So give you a little update on how things have been and where we're at. So
hopefully you guys like our episodes about motherhood, because that's all our lives are right now.
Yeah, we're deep in the thick of it. So other topics definitely coming soon, but for right now, this is being 30. This is in our 30s. This is what we're doing, is having kids, raising kids, and I'm gonna share my unfiltered experience about giving birth and early motherhood, and hopefully someone finds it interesting or relates and feels a little bit less alone in how they experienced it. So that's my goal, is just to share my story, and hopefully someone connects with it.
Yeah. And I can give some updates on where I've been, which is going to be a similar experience to yours, as if maybe other people have been struggling in the same areas as me that, again, can relate, and maybe we can help some people with this episode that's going to be pretty deep into the thick of things that we've been struggling with. So
But authenticity and just real life, man. This is real life, and if we can help someone, or we can make someone feel a little bit less alone in their journey, then that's why we're here. Yeah. So who would like to start?
Why don't you start?
Okay. So as I mentioned, I have a beautiful baby girl. She was born 7 weeks ago. And so I'm going to share a little bit about kind of the end of my pregnancy, our birth experience, and then kind of a overview of how postpartum has been. Because this will be not the first time Danny's hearing the story, but it'll be
I was going to say, I think I haven't heard a full in-depth version of what has been kind of going on with you in general.
So at the end of my pregnancy, I found out that my daughter was, which I didn't know she was my daughter at that point. The baby was transverse to breech. She was very big in utero, and I also had gestational diabetes, which we did talk about before. So all those factors considered, I went in for one of my last appointments at around 36 weeks, and my doctor was very adamant that our best course of action was probably to do a scheduled C-section. Mm-hmm. I had a really hard time coming to terms with that. I remember I left that appointment and just sat in the car and called my husband and just bawled. And not because anything was wrong necessarily. It just I had to let go of the idea of birth that I had spent 36 weeks coming to, imagining and wanting and hoping for. And it was really hard. And so I went in a couple days later for another appointment, and during the first conversation, my doctor and I had discussed the possibility of attempting an ECV, which is where they try to rotate the baby manually from the outside of your stomach. And because of how large she was because it was my first baby.
Do you know how they would have done that?
So it's as barbaric as it sounds.
Okay, because
Yes.
I was going to say my mom's experience, which was obviously now, it was with my sister who is older than me, which was 34 years ago, probably.
It's probably the exact same procedure.
I was say, what do they say?
So my understanding of it is that it's all done externally. So they take their hands and they find the baby's position inside the womb, and then they push.
Okay.
And it's literally just them trying to shove the baby, like, obviously this is an audio podcast, but, like, they just take their hands, place them on the mother's stomach, and just sort of, like, push down and around to try to rotate them so that they're head down.
So, I don't know if it was, like, exactly the same situation, but their goal was to rotate the baby. And so they literally came into my mom's room with pots and pans and banged pots and pans over my mom's stomach
to try to scare the baby
down? To try to noise of it. The noise apparently like had them shift and move or whatever. So
that was not an option that was given to me. So they maybe moved past that approach, but yeah, it was
still just as kind of
just as strange and
yeah.
And so when I went back for the second appointment, my doctor was like, I thought about the situation. I thought about all the factors. I really don't think it's a good idea for us to do that. And I had honestly come to the same conclusion. When I left that first appointment, I sort of just had to have a full surrender moment of, I'm not going to get the birth experience that I planned.
Yeah.
And that has to be okay.
Yeah.
Right? Like, the safety of me and the baby has to be
priority.
Put above my pride of, like, wanting to do something a certain way.
Yeah.
And so I had also come to that conclusion. And so after that appointment, we scheduled our C-section. I was scheduled at 38 weeks. And so we went in, and I had only really heard of C-section experiences. I only know one person in our group of friends that had a scheduled C-section. Mm-hmm. The other two were more emergent or urgent situations. And so I didn't really know fully what to expect, but I have to say my experience with having a C-section was very calm.
Yeah, that's how my sister...
Very organized.
Yeah, that's how my sister's was too, because hers was scheduled. So.
And you just, like,
She was like, it was the greatest thing. You went in, everything was nice and easy, and...
I went in, we got there, like, early in the morning.
Yeah.
I... did like my pre-op testing and all that stuff. They got me into my robe. Jeff was able to be, there with me through most of it. When it was time for me to go in for the procedure, they took me in, they gave me a spinal block, which is like one of the weirdest sensations. So I've never had an epidural, so I don't know how to compare the feelings of them. But the spinal block... I had like some sensation below my waist, but like everything just felt like I was getting a massage. Like it was just like touch and motion, and there was no pain.
Yeah.
So it just sort of felt like someone was like kind of gently massaging your muscle as opposed to slicing you open with a scalpel. Ew. Like, it was very weird. Because, like, I didn't know what to expect. I thought maybe I would be, like, totally numb from the waist down. But, no, I felt all the movement, just none of the pain. Yeah. So, I think it made it nice because I could tell kind of, like, that things were happening as opposed to, like, being totally cut off from my body. My staff at the hospital for the surgery was super great. I did not know this until afterwards, but apparently my doctor, my OB who did the procedure, shout out to Dr. Rojak. She is apparently like renowned in the area for her skills at C-section incisions, and like very good at like hiding scars and making sure that they're like very clean cuts and everything. So, I'll show you my cut. I'll show you my scar later. But so that was encouraging to hear the nursing staff talking about that. So they gave me my spinal block. They started the incisions and everything. My husband came back in, and up until this moment, we did not know still if we were having a boy or a girl. And so when I felt them pull the baby out, the best description I can give of it was like when you drop on a roller coaster and like you felt like that like whoop in your stomach.
Really?
Of her of all of the pressure being removed from inside
crazy.
of me. Like that was what it felt like. And I felt that, and they dropped the curtain so that I could see, and they held her up and said, "It's a girl." And she cried, and I bawled my eyes out. Jeff was amazing the whole time. He's just, sitting next to me, like, "I'm so proud of you. I'm so happy, like, you're doing so great. Our baby's almost here." And so as they're, cleaning her up and getting her over to weigh, my doctor kind of looks over the curtain and says, "It's a really good thing we didn't do the ECV, try to rotate her, because the cord was wrapped around her neck 3 times.
Oh, Jesus.
And we had never known because in all of the ultrasound pictures that we had gotten, her hands were always up by her face. So we never got like a super clear view. We don't know how long it was like that. We don't know, if that was like a recent thing or if it had been like that for a while. But if we would have tried to rotate her, there wouldn't have been enough umbilical cord for her to move, and she would have started to be strangled.
Wow, that's crazy.
And so it was a really good thing that we came to the decision that we did.
Wow, that's wild.
The bummer, besides her having the cord wrapped around her neck, the biggest downside of that was that, like, Jeff did not get to cut the cord, which I know he was, like, kind of looking forward to, but because it was wrapped, they had to do all the manipulation of it, and, like, check and make sure she was okay. But she was a hefty 9 pounds at birth, with a giant head like we knew she had. But, yes, Miss Madeline came into the world beautiful and crying, just the way babies you hope they do. And so, yeah, it was very easy, very smooth. And I know I'm very lucky in that because I know it's not always like that. But, I feel like C-sections sometimes get, like, I don't know, like a bad rap, or like people portray them, especially like in media, it's like the emergency option. Like it's because something's wrong, or it's like this big, like, wheeling the gurney down the hallway type of thing. But at least with my scheduled planned C-section, it was...
I was going to say, with scheduled, it's a little bit
different. Which is great because, like, I don't know, I've never seen a portrayal of that in like media, you know what I mean? So I feel like even when women are given the option of a C-section, especially if that's like the only frame of reference you have is like what you've seen in TV shows, it probably is like terrifying to hear that, like, that's what you're going to be experiencing. So I was very pleasantly surprised. I had a great experience, early postpartum in the hospital as well. We were there for about 4 days. And the staff was, again, phenomenal. Shout out to Elaine, who was like our head nurse on the floor. She was born to be like a maternity ward nurse. Like, she was so fun, so encouraging, the right amount of like, here's what we need to be doing, with like a good amount of like care and like cheerleader energy. It wasn't until the last night that the night nurse came in and she was like, that bed opens up further. Jeff had been sleeping on the little cot that they have, like the pull-out couch, but unbeknownst to us until the day before we were leaving, it opened up further. So poor dude spent 4 days all crunched up on the bed. Both of our parents and all of our siblings came to see us in the hospital, which was nice. We got to announce her name to everyone and find out that she was a girl, which is super exciting. I am very pleased to have been correct since the moment that I found out I was pregnant. I would have, not that I would have been bummed that I had a boy, but it would have been a little bit of...
It was more that you were wrong.
It was, exactly. It would have been a blow to my ego to, like, not be able to know that, like, I was able to predict, like, everyone else's, and, like, to get mine wrong would have been embarrassing. But yeah, so that was my birth experience, and then we came home, and things changed pretty quickly for me. I have always struggled with depression and anxiety. I have been working on that for many years. I was in no way, shape, or form prepared for the way I felt when I got home.
Yeah.
As someone who has, who's very open about their mental health, who works actively on their mental health, I've been seeing a therapist for on and off for, almost 10 years. I have been working with a therapist since a little bit after I found out I was pregnant, to, build up a support system. And you know what? Shout out to past me for doing that and like getting that relationship established.
Yeah.
Because
probably helpful. Yeah.
There was a time about three weeks postpartum, where I wasn't 100% sure I was going to make it to 4 weeks postpartum. Like I was not prepared for how dark and empty I was going to feel, which is horrible for multiple reasons, right? Like obviously just on the front of it, no one wants to feel like that.
Yeah.
But two, it's postpartum depression is so, at least in my experience, so much harder than what I've experienced of depression in the past, because I've had bad moments. I've had really low lows. I've had, parts of my life where I didn't want to live anymore. But when you're actively feeling like you don't want to be here anymore, while everyone around you is telling you that this should be the best time of your life, it not only do you have the feelings of like, I can't do this, but you also then feel the guilt of like, but I should, like, I have no reason to be feeling like this. Yeah. Everyone around me is happy. Everyone around me is telling me that this is like the best thing that's ever happened to me. And I just feel like giving up.
Yeah.
And, yeah, it was pretty bad. And it kind of crept up a little bit slowly. It started off as anxiety, which all mothers, I think, early on, or all new parents even, you have that level of anxiety, right? Of like, am I doing this right? Yeah. Like, oh, they're crying. What does that mean? Have I fed them recently? And I think the anxiety fueled the depression because, and I've this is something that I have talked about with my therapist a lot, even before I had a baby, is that I tend to have two approaches to things, to like addressing situations. I either go in 110%, like do it, figure it out, be the best at it. And if I can't do that, then I try to run away from it. Yeah. And for the first time in my life, I was faced with a situation where I could not do either one of those things. Because you can't 100% baby or take care of a baby. Because you don't know what you're doing. Yeah. And you could do everything perfectly, and they're still going to cry. Yeah. Things could still go wrong. Yeah. And so then when I can't do that, my default is then, okay, run away and avoid it. I can't do that either, right? Like this child is literally dependent on me to exist, to live. Yeah. And so whenever my body and my mind came to that realization that my two coping mechanisms of handling tough situations were not an option, the conclusion that my brain came to was, then we don't need to be here. That like living is not worth it anymore. Yeah. I never actively wanted to kill myself, but I 100% was fine if I died. Yeah. Yeah. And my body reacted accordingly. For the first 3 weeks, almost the first 4 weeks that we were home, I when I came out of the hospital, I had my first postpartum appointment. I had dropped down to my pre-pregnancy weight, which was about 25-ish pounds. Yeah. Which was mostly swelling. Like most of the weight that I gained, aside from the baby and
the baby
the
weight,
self
yeah.
and like the placenta and stuff, most of the weight that I had was in swelling.
Yeah.
And so I had dropped down pretty quickly when I lost all that swelling to like my pre-pregnancy-ish weight. In the next 2 weeks, I lost another 20 pounds because I was not eating. My body just did not want to eat. I was constantly nauseous. Chewing made me gag. Like nothing sounded appetizing. And it was like my body was giving up. My body was like, okay, we can't do this, so we're just not going to waste the energy on staying alive anymore. I only had like one active thought of like harming myself, and it scared the absolute shit out of me. You know, I had to set up extra appointments with my therapist because I just felt empty. Like I felt so depleted.
Yeah.
And like everything had been taken from me. I was like fantasizing about going back to work so I could like go and do something that like I felt good at and I felt like I was able to do. I was growing resentful of my daughter and her need for me. And yeah, it got to, I mean, some of the things that you think, or like some of the thoughts that your mind comes up with, it's like, you know, you're not your thoughts.
Yeah.
But then you also have to wonder, like, but where do these come from then?
Yeah.
And it's hard to like reconcile the fact that like, you know, there was a little part of my brain that was like, well, if she dies in her sleep tonight, it'll be tough, but like I'll move forward and I'll have my life back. And that's like a horrible thing to think. And I didn't want to be thinking those things, but I also like couldn't stop them.
Yeah.
And, you know, it took me, you know, a lot of extra therapy sessions. It took some tough conversations with my husband, and like huge shout out to like my mother and my sister who were just willing and able to be here almost every single day. Because then I also felt guilty because my poor husband is trying to keep this baby alive and also trying to keep his wife alive. And like, that's a lot to, I know. Do you want to take a break?
I don't even know where you left off.
That's okay. Sorry. We just needed to take a quick breather. But so yeah, obviously things weren't great. You know, obviously retroactively, it's a lot easier to look back on and, you know, either minimize and be like, oh, I guess it wasn't that bad, or, you know, rationalize as to like why you were thinking, like, you know, oh, it was hormones, it was whatever. But anyone that's been in the fit of like a depressive episode knows that it doesn't matter that I've been through things like that before. It doesn't matter that like I've survived every episode of depression I've had. When you're in it, it feels like there is no way out of it.
Yeah.
And I do promise that this story gets way happier. So I'm going to talk about some of the things that helped me, because, you know, one of the things I obsessively did for like several days was just like anything I could find that was going to help me feel better.
Yeah.
So spoiler alert for anyone who's maybe worried about postpartum depression, in the midst of postpartum depression. Unfortunately, time is the main thing, right? Like time moves you forward. And it did two things for me. One, it gave my body time to heal.
Yeah.
Because obviously, you know, the postpartum experience physically is its own thing, right? You're, in my case, recovering from major surgery. You know, your body just lost an entire like system out of it.
Yeah. It's like the biggest hormone drop you'll ever experience.
Like it's absolutely insane.
Mm-hmm.
And
I think it's like equivalent to taking like, I think I've read somewhere that it's like when you're pregnant, it's equivalent to taking 100 like birth control pills, and then all of a sudden going down to like 0 as soon as you give birth. Like
I
it's
believe
like
that,
that
yeah.
crazy of a hormone drop.
And if you hear some minor cooing, crying, or whining, my daughter is in the room with us, so
A little visitor today.
just in case you hear her. But yeah, so your body's depleted physically and emotionally because you also just went through the birthing experience, and there's a huge identity shift of like going from a person who is pregnant to a mother. You know, your identity shifts not just in like your own capacity, but then you now in the span of, you know, a literal minute, they hand you this baby and they're like, great, take care of them.
Keep it alive.
And no matter how many books you read, how many podcasts you listen to, how many friends and family you know that have gone through it, not a single thing on this planet prepares you to be a first-time mom until you are a first-time mom.
Yeah.
And you have 9 months to become used to being pregnant. You have like one moment to adapt to being a mother, and then you just are. And that shift is hard. And so time has helped that become more grounded in me, and I feel more, I mean, it's still kind of strange that like, this is my daughter.
Yeah.
I am her mother. Like, those are still thoughts that don't fully feel real, but they have gotten more real with time, and that has helped. So time has helped a lot. Obviously, like, a good support system is unmatched. You know, I am very, very fortunate that I have a very hands-on husband who was able to have time off of work to be here with us 24/7.
Yeah.
I am very lucky to have that. You know, I have been honest about my mental health experiences with my husband, and so he knew that this was a possibility. I don't think either of us were prepared for just how intense it got.
Yeah.
But, you know, luckily, not only was he very supportive and, you know, giving me, you know, saying, hey, clock out for today. I will take care of the baby. You rest, you sleep, you do what you need to do.
Yeah.
But then when the time was right, it was sort of tough conversations of like, do you want to be here with us? Because if you do, we need to make some changes. Like, whatever that might look like, if you want to do this with us, you need to try. And it doesn't always have to be perfect, but you need to try, because in his eyes, and probably in reality, I was just giving up.
Yeah.
And if nothing else, no matter what thoughts I was having about myself or, you know, my daughter, I knew I couldn't lose my husband. And so him positioning himself with her and saying, like, either you're with us or you're not, made me want to try. And then by doing that, it helped build the bond with my daughter.
Yeah.
So time and a support system, like I said, my mother and my sister were here between the two of them basically every day for like the first 3 weeks, which was incredibly helpful. I wanted them around, not really because I didn't trust that Jeff could take care of the baby, but that like I didn't trust me to take care of me. Like, I needed someone to like watch me.
Yeah.
Because he was busy. He had to take care of Maddie. So like, I needed someone to babysit me. And they were great. You know, I had a lot of friends that, you know, you, Ari, Britton, that were over, Rachel, that came, and having people over provided a lot of things. It was A, little bit of a distraction.
Yeah.
B, it felt a little bit more like my quote unquote normal life.
Yeah.
And so it didn't feel as like isolating, and it felt more like me, like, oh, me having my friends over is something I would do before my daughter was born. So it felt more grounding. But then also 3, it helped time move faster.
Yeah.
Because the one thing I will say about newborn life is that it
Days
is
are long.
Groundhog's Day.
Yes.
You know, especially those first like 3 to 4 weeks, because she hadn't regained all of her birth weight yet. We were needing to wake her up every 3 hours to feed her. And so my life was spent in just this 3-hour loop of feed, change, burp, sleep, repeat.
Yeah.
And it was making me go a little stir crazy.
Yeah.
And so, knowing, oh, Danny's coming over tomorrow, or we're going to go to my parents' house tomorrow, like that helped move the time forward in a way that broke the loop a little bit.
Yeah.
And so that was really helpful.
Yeah.
But I will say, I think for me, the third and what I would assume was probably the most helpful thing, postpartum depression-wise, was Lexapro. I had, like I said, set up appointments with my therapist. I met with her a lot. I had my postpartum appointments with my OB. And that intervention, I think, was absolutely necessary for me.
Yeah.
If I'm being totally honest, I probably would have benefited from Lexapro years ago. But I was always in a position where I could just manage my depression and anxiety independently outside of medication, because if I needed to rot in bed for 4 days, I could. Mm-hmm. And like, if I needed to, get away and go by myself and do something, I could. Not anymore. So a lot of the coping mechanisms and skills that I had developed, I wasn't able to use anymore without either A, at all, or B, without feeling insanely guilty about it. And so, I talked it through with my therapist. I talked it through with my doctor. And I was in like that, I think I started it at 3 weeks postpartum-ish. And I was nervous because I was like, I don't want to start it too soon, because what if this is just like the baby blues and like I wake up tomorrow and everything is like rose-colored glasses, because you hear stories about, like antidepressants and SSRIs and stuff, and I didn't want to deal with any of like the horrific negative side effects. I also didn't want to become like a zombie of myself. But I got to a point where even that sounded better than how I was feeling. And so for me, when I got to the point of making the decision, it was at least worth the shot.
Yeah.
Because it's not permanent.
I was going to say, that's what usually, like, with my, like, own clients, the way that I describe medication is, like, kind of how you were saying, like, when you're kind of in that, like, space where it feels like there's no way out of it, medication can be that, like, crutch to just help you kind of, like, take that, like, step to then be able to do some of these things to actually then do it on your own.
Exactly.
And so, like, that's how I always explain it, because I think it's so much easier to look at it of, like, okay, this is just going to help me get to where I want to be, and then when I have the skills to do it on my own, I don't have to stay on this medication if I don't want to.
Absolutely.
And it just kind of helps, like, their thought process of what medication actually is compared to their idea of, like, okay, this is just now something that I have to take for the rest of my life.
Yeah. I definitely think that that's probably a big part of, or one of the big reasons people are so afraid of it, because there is this idea that you'll never not be on it. And I know that that's not the case. And, again, for all my knowledge of mental health and experiences and stuff, even I struggled with making the decision to go on medication. But I'm so glad that I did. I've been on it for probably about a month now, I would say. And when we took the little break, Danny was saying, like, you're handling this, like, so well, like, telling the story. And I think a big part of it is because I feel balanced. Like, probably, obviously every single person has a different experience with mental health medication. My experience with the Lexapro has been, I still have felt every emotion. I've laughed, I've cried, smiled, anger, all of it. But instead of it being like 0 and 100 and 0 and 100 and 0 and 100, it's more like 30, 60, 40, 20. Like, it's way more even keeled. And I don't feel like I'm either at a 10 out of 10, high alert, constantly anxious, or bottomed out, empty, depleted, nothing. And that's exactly what I hoped it was going to be. I haven't really noticed a ton of other side effects. I know early on, and maybe a little bit still, like dry mouth was like the one thing that I kind of noticed. I'm only like 7 weeks postpartum, so I don't have a sex drive anyway. So we'll see how that develops. But I know that's one of the other SSRI main side effects. I don't know how people get pregnant right after having a baby, because I am just like so touched out all the time. I'm like, please step away from me.
Leave me alone.
You know, I'm sure it'll be there someday, but for right now, get away. But yeah, Lexapro did everything I wanted it to do. And I was able to avoid the things I was afraid of. And so, you know, obviously every single person's going to have a different experience, but to anyone that's in a position that's similar, just know that it's not forever.
Yeah.
Right? Like they say it takes about 2 to 4 weeks to like fully integrate into your system. You know, if it gets worse or it doesn't help or you don't like the way you feel, there are other medications you can try. B, you don't have to be on it forever.
Yeah.
You know, I went back for another checkup with my OB, and she was like, you are a totally different person right now, which is good, because the person I was the first appointment was just a gross, empty shell of myself. And so her and I had a conversation that, like, you know, we're not even going to talk about weaning off of this until the spring, because she doesn't like to wean people off for like 6 months anyway, like once they're good on their dose. And I was like, yeah, coming off of an antidepressant in the middle of a buffalo winter sounds like setting myself up for disaster. So we'll talk about
Especially
it.
If you feel like things are Groundhog's Day now, wait until the middle of winter when you actually can't go anywhere.
Yeah, so we'll talk about that when the spring comes back and the sun is out, and you know, make it, at least set myself up to be in a better position to be successful.
Well, and I think, like, obviously, I don't know, like, where you're at now with it, but obviously, I think I didn't experience postpartum the way that you did, but one of the things, like you mentioned, of just every day feeling like Groundhog's Day, like, going out and doing things was, like, my savior. Like, obviously I was lucky, too, because Sean got a few weeks off and had a few days here randomly, but, like, we'd go out to lunch and, like, go out on a patio, and I had my sisters who were obviously on maternity leave. We'd go to the pool. I literally walked every single morning, and just finding ways to, like, get out of the house, I think is the biggest help when it comes to, like, postpartum anxiety and depression. Like, it's a lot more work, don't get me wrong, to, like, pack the baby up and go somewhere, but it's 100% worth it. Like, it will make you feel so much better than just being stuck in the house on a loop day in and day out, like, every single day.
Oh, 100%. You know, like, and that's, for me, it was, you know, we brought her home early July, and we had, like, those, like, 2, like, scorching hot weeks, so we really hadn't been able to get out and, like, walk, because it was like 90 degrees and blaring sun. So, like, we would go to my parents, or we would, like, go to Target and, like, walk around. And, you know, for a while, like, having someone come over gave me the same approach, because I texted some of my friends from high school that one of them had her baby in December, one of them had her baby in February, and I was like, I don't know how you guys did this in winter. Like, and, you know, they were also had postpartum experiences, but I don't think either of them had the experience the way I did. But, like, I could not imagine doing this in the dark. Like, it would be so much worse for me, at least. And I knew I didn't want to have a baby in the winter because of, like, weather and snow and sickness. But I'm definitely never putting myself in a position to get pregnant where I'd be giving birth in...
You're like, if I can manage it, we're planning every single pregnancy to be...
Absolutely. 130%. Like, there's no shot. Just, there's no sex from the months where the conception would lead to a birth from December to March. Okay, that's just the rule now. But... I think the last thing that I'll talk about when it comes to, like, overcoming the postpartum depression, and we can talk about this maybe a little bit as a transition into, you know, some updates of yours, but having to be okay with doing things that were right for me. And I was telling Danny a little bit about this earlier, but one of the first like weights off of my shoulders was like I dropped breastfeeding. My daughter is exclusively formula fed. When I obviously I had a planned C-section that was 2 weeks early. So when I gave birth, my milk had not come in yet. And so in the hospital, we were feeding her formula. And, you know, she wasn't up to her birth weight. And so we were tracking very carefully how much she was getting and everything. My milk came in, I think, 2 or 3 days after we got home. Because we had been using, like, the nipple shield and droppering formula in to try to help stimulate everything. So it came in fairly quickly. But because we had been using the nipple shield, she wasn't accustomed to latching onto my nipple. She really was not having it.
Yeah.
It was taking us over an hour to do a feeding.
Yeah.
And then when you're in an every 3-hour loop, that's all you're doing.
Yeah.
And, you know, I was getting frustrated. She was getting frustrated. I was horribly anxious about not knowing how much she was getting because we had previously been able to see, like, okay, she got an ounce or, you know, with the formula. Now, when she's at the boob, I can't tell you how much she's getting. I don't know if she's actually full or if she's just fussy or if she's, you know, and that was heightening my anxiety tenfold. So when we went for our first appointment, and they were like, well, we might have to get to a point where we're supplementing with formula, depending on how much weight she gains. I was like, no, we're just going to move to the formula then. Initially, I was going to do like pumping and formula, but I don't know if it's just because I was like so deep in the depression and anxiety at that point, but like it was like I was like afraid of pumping. Like I don't know fully how to explain how I felt about it. But like I got like sick to my stomach when I like looked at the pumps. Like I don't know. I tried them a few times. Like I tried to get them all set up and use them. I was again like, and maybe it comes back to like my like avoidance tendency when I'm like not good at something, like because I couldn't figure it out. I just like didn't want anything to do with it. And I had set up an appointment with a lactation consultant, but then after a conversation with my mom and Jeff, we just decided that like we were going to go full formula. Initially, the guilt that I felt for that almost made me not move forward with it. But a few days after making the decision, because there's so much of like breast is best and, you know, breastfeeding babies are healthier and they're whatever, which I found out, thank you to the Formula Feeders Reddit feed, because y'all really have some great insights. I found out that, caveat, I am not diminishing breastfeeding. Women who exclusively breastfeed, women who pump, women who do combo feed, whatever your choice is, we are all fucking superheroes, okay? Point blank, period. But the propaganda of breastfeeding, because my mom was so confused. She's like, when I had you, no one breastfed. Like, my mom was the only person she knew that even attempted to breastfeed.
Really? I feel like that's so weird because I thought it was like an older generation thing that was kind of always about breastfeeding too.
My mom said that almost, and like older, this is the one and only time that older women have been super understanding of like a choice that I've been making, because none of them breastfed.
Yeah.
And so they were all like, I don't blame you at all. Formula's great. All of my kids were formula kids. Like, they're all fine. They're happy, healthy, whatever. But I won't bore everyone with the details of it. If you're interested, you should definitely look it up. But I found out that a lot of the propaganda for breastfeeding comes from two places. One, a lot of the studies that they did were based off of like third world countries where clean water access isn't as prevalent. Yeah. And so formula was a worse option because they didn't have clean water to make formula with. But when you take that out of consideration, a lot of the negatives go away. Yeah. And then two, a lot of hospitals get grant funding for being breastfeeding hospitals. And so they push the narrative of like having mothers breastfeed, because if they can report that 75% or more of their mothers are breastfeeders, they get more money. And so again, not diminishing breastfeeding, not saying that one choice is better than the other, but this recent revival of like the breast is best can be really diminishing and harmful for women that either A, can't breastfeed, B, struggle to breastfeed, or honestly C, don't want to breastfeed. And it can be, really guilt-ridden and isolating when, there's not an open, honest conversation about that being like, just like fed is best. Because the number one indicator of healthy, happy kids is healthy, happy parents.
Yeah.
And breastfeeding was making me so anxious that I did not want to feed my daughter.
Yeah.
And that's not healthy. That's not good for her. So for us in my family, going exclusively formula meant that Jeff could feed her overnight so I could try to get more sleep.
Yeah.
It meant that I could enjoy feeding time. It meant that I didn't have to worry about how much she was getting. I could see that she was getting enough food.
Yeah.
Like, for me, that was the answer.
Yeah.
And that doing things my way and not like forcing myself to like align with a narrative that I thought that I needed to has been something that's showing up again and again in different ways. But being able to be my own version of what a mother is, I think is really important too. And not just doing it, but like coming to grips with it. Because there's no wrong, well,
maybe there is a wrong way, but
I'll say it the other direction. There are many right ways to be a mother. And just because the way, your aunt, your friend, your sister, your cousin, your favorite influencer online, just because they do things a certain way and they swear it works for them, doesn't mean that it's going to work for you, or it should work for you, or that the way you're doing things are wrong. If your baby, and I had a great conversation with my OB, she helped me a lot through that first depression hump. But she's like, is your baby eating? Is your baby sleeping? Is your baby clean and not laying in their own filth? Is your baby being held enough but not too much? Great. That's literally all you need to do. And whatever factors allow you to do that, that's what's the most important. And so that took a lot of the weight off of me. So I think, those were probably the best things I did moving through my postpartum journey. I'm happy to report that, 7 weeks down the road, I am obsessed with my daughter, and I finally feel bonded to her. I kind of surprised myself the other night. We put her down for like her first like overnight stretch of sleep, and I was like, I just want to go in there and like sit on the floor next to her. And it was like the first time that I had like had that thought. And I was just really proud of myself for not giving up. Because it's easy to like hindsight and be like, oh, of course I got through it. It wasn't that bad. But like in the midst of it, I did not think there would be a point where I wanted to spend time with my daughter. And I'm glad that I made the decisions that I did. I'm glad that I had the support that I did to get to the point where I can enjoy my beautiful miracle. Like, obviously life is different and life is harder in a lot of ways, but it's also better and brighter, and now I get to see the world as she experiences it. So quite the roller coaster ride, but we made it. And so she's approaching 2 months. She's starting to smile, and she's doing her tummy time. She's very strong. She's also just loves being held. Danny's been holding her almost this entire time we've been recording. Because during the day, that's the main way she sleeps is by sitting on someone. So, all right, we're going to take a quick break. It'll be like 2 seconds for you, but I think we both need a second to refresh, and then we'll come back and we'll share some other updates of what's been going on. So, yes, that was postpartum and birth for me. And like I said, my family has grown by one, and she is saying hi.
Not happy now. So yeah, to keep the heaviness going for you guys, I can share a little bit about what's been going on with me, and hopefully I can get through this without crying. But, so I know the last episode I announced that I was pregnant. Unfortunately, in the last 2 weeks, I ended up miscarrying. So I actually have to tell you the whole story. So this is a good way for me to kind of share kind of what my experience with it, and then obviously, like I said, if anybody else is going through it, maybe this can help, other people who have struggled with the same thing, because I know obviously it's more common than people talk about.
Yeah.
But so basically, I went in for my first ultrasound. Now I think it's been like 2 weeks. And because I wasn't exactly sure about the exact date of my last period, I have a general, idea of, a 2-week time frame, but I don't have, an exact day. So when I went in for my ultrasound, they wanted to do, an internal ultrasound because they didn't know how far along I was and where I was at. So I kind of go into more detail about where I thought I was at with the ultrasound. But so I went in for the ultrasound, and unfortunately, I switched OBs recently, and they wanted me to go to the hospital for my first ultrasound because they don't do first trimester ultrasounds at their office.
Interesting.
Yes. So that was obviously different for me because I switched OBs, and that is not something I've experienced. So going to the hospital was definitely at first, that was, a weird experience. I don't really know how to, describe it other than it wasn't as comfy as, going to a doctor's office, getting your first ultrasound. It was a little more, medical, I guess, I don't know if that's...
clinical.
Yeah, if that's the right way to describe it. So I went to the hospital. The room was very, cold. They had, these big metal doors. It was just, a weird experience off the bat. And so they, like I said, they wanted to do, an internal ultrasound because they weren't sure how far along I was, and obviously, it can detect things better if anything is, wrong or anything like that. So I agreed to do the internal one. And the woman doing my ultrasound, as soon as I agreed to it, started, talking to me about how people have, experienced... people say they've experienced miscarriages from an internal ultrasound, and she's, going on about, this, people posting about this on TikTok, and she's well, that's not actually true, but people say it is. And then she was well, it is made by men, so you never know. And obviously, I'm why are you saying this to me? I just agreed to do this, and now you're saying this to me as I'm, doing it. And I'm this
what a weird...
Yes, it was a weird experience. Then, as she's doing the internal ultrasound, my experience with ultrasounds was always how far along are you? Are you excited for the baby? It was a very, joyous moment, and it was more of, not that. So, that was such a weird transition to be, the woman didn't even know what I was there for. She's why are you having a pelvic ultrasound? I was well, I'm pregnant. I'm having a pregnancy ultrasound. She didn't even know that. And then as she's doing it, she's not telling me anything. She's not talking to me about, anything she's seeing. She's just taking a bunch of, pictures, and she's talking about, her life. She's talking about her nephew and, Chuck E. Cheese, and telling me about how much she paid to go to Chuck E. Cheese. And it was just, a weird experience. I was I don't, I have something in my vagina right now. I don't care about your nephew or Chuck E. Cheese. Right. Can you please just tell me anything that's going on with what you're doing to my body right now?
Yeah, especially because that's so different than, the experiences you had previously. So it would be very, startling.
So it was very, just uncomfortable. And then at the end, it was kind of, she was so it looks like you're 5 weeks along. And I was no. I'm there's no way that I'm 5 weeks.
Yeah.
And she's well, that's what it's saying. I was I took a test 5 weeks ago. It's not going to be positive the day I conceived.
Right.
And the way, for all of you who don't know, the way pregnancy works is it's 40 weeks because the first 2 weeks you're actually not pregnant. It goes by your last
The date of your last period, yeah.
So the first 2 weeks, you're not even pregnant. And then it takes, usually they say you can't take a pregnancy test, like...
For another 2 weeks.
Another, like, 8 days is, like, the minimum. So I'm like, by the time I take a pregnancy test, I should be 3 weeks along. Right. At minimum. Like, at minimum. So I'm like, if I go by the minimum I should at least be 9 weeks. Because it was 6 weeks from the time I took the pregnancy test plus the 3 weeks before that. So I'm like, at minimum, I should be 9. If I'm going on the date of my last period, I should be close to 12 right now. Because my last period was at the beginning of April.
Right.
No, May.
Yeah, end of April.
End of April, beginning of May was my last period. So I was like, based on that, I thought I was close to 12 weeks at this point, and you're telling me I'm 5. So and she's like, well, that's just what it's saying. She's like, you got your blood work done, like, your doctor will call you and kind of send me out my way. I cried the whole way home because I was like, this is not right. I was like, that was the weirdest thing I've ever experienced, and I just, like, bawled my eyes out, and I'm like, something is not right. Like, I don't know what's going on, but this is not accurate because... at minimum, I should be 9, like, at weeks. So, I called my, like, OB immediately, and I was like, please, someone call me back. Like, I don't know why she's telling me this, blah, blah. Anyways, so I got my results back, and on the paperwork, she put that I was 6 weeks. So, I don't know. So, she said differently, whatever. So, then I called my OB. The OB called me to, like, go over the results, and she's like, I hear you. She's like, I know. Based off of, like, the math, like, it seems like something's not right. And she's like, so we'll schedule you an ultrasound next Monday and make sure, like, and see within the week, like, the growth that's happening. So we'll just kind of track it throughout the week. Because basically they told me, I don't know the medical terms, but they basically said that it was, like, the sac without the fetal pole developing. Is kind of what it said on the thing. So... she calls me, that was Tuesday, and then 3 hours later I started bleeding. So, after, like, I messaged her back on the portal, and I was like, hey, like, just so you know, I started bleeding. But they did say when they did my ultrasound that I also had this, like, weird blood sac in my ovaries, and that she seemed to say it wasn't really, like, anything I should worry about, but she told me not to, like... have sex, not to do heavy lifting, to, like, try not to burst it. So she was like, when I talked to her about the bleeding, she's like, there is a possibility that you could have bursted it, and that's what it is. Right. But it also does sound like you possibly could be miscarrying. So she's like, just, you know, see what happens, like, and we'll still do the ultrasound on Monday and go from there. So after Tuesday, when I started bleeding, I just kind of, like, got heavier and heavier, and, on, like, Friday and Saturday, I even, like, experienced, like, contractions. So I was, like, convinced. I was like, I know that I'm miscarrying. And, you know, my husband was like, just wait, we don't actually know, you know, trying to be nice and supportive. Yeah. But I was like...
But you knew.
I was like, I know. Like, I know what's happening. So... yeah, so I continued to bleed, and then we go in for the ultrasound Monday, and actually, like, at the doctor's office while we were waiting, it was probably the most blood that I've bled, like, right before I went in for the ultrasound, and it was like, I was like, this is it, I know it is. So we go in for the ultrasound, they do the ultrasound, and then the doctor comes in and obviously, like, announces that I miscarried, so that was actually last Monday, that I got, like, the final confirmation. So the week of it happening, I think, was probably the worst week of it. Yeah. Like, I think once I, like, obviously, like, obviously a loss is, like, something you have to grieve regardless, but I think the week of it happening, I think, was the worst of it, because people obviously knew I was pregnant. People were still asking me, like, how I was doing, and I couldn't, like, say anything, because I'm like, I don't know. Like,
I'm doing fucking horrible. Thank you for asking.
I'm like, like, I feel like I know that I'm miscarrying, but I'm not going to, like, tell the world that as it's happening because there was a possibility that it might not be. So I think, like, that week of it was the worst, and I think finding out was obviously horrible and probably the worst day of it, but I think after that was more of, like, a relief of that I finally, like, knew what happened, and I kind of, like, felt, because one of the things that I didn't realize either was, like, they were saying, like, to know you're miscarrying, you also have a decrease of pregnancy symptoms. Mm-hmm. And for all those who don't know, I'm very prone to nausea, just in general in my life. And for the last, like, probably month or so, I've been nauseous, like, every single day. And after, like, Friday when I had, like, the contractions, and, like, Saturday, like, I just stopped being nauseous.
It's probably the only time in your life you were upset you were nauseous.
I know. So, like, I knew, like I said, like, I knew what was happening with my body, but I also, like, once, like, the nausea went away, I was like, all right, like, I know that this is kind of it. So, unfortunately, like, now I have to, for all those of you who don't know, like, what happens after, like, a miscarriage, I have to go back in for blood work this week, and, like, your HCG levels, that kind of detect pregnancy, I have to wait until they get back down to 0, so that, because, like, my hormones are obviously still, like, they might still come back elevated to say that I'm pregnant, even though I'm not. So I have to wait until those get down to 0, and then when they're down to 0 and my period comes back, like, we could actually start trying again to, like, have another baby. But that's kind of, like, the process of, like, now what is going to be the steps to, like, move forward. So, like, overall, like I said, I think now I'm in a better place than I was the week of it happening, but, you know, obviously it's not a great experience to go through, and, like, you know, just, like, I thought I was 12 weeks, so I'm like, okay, in February we're gonna have a baby, and then they were telling me, wait, that's not true, it's gonna be, like, you know, April now, and I was like, wait, that's, so, like, my whole, like, I think my whole, like, mindset has been totally, like, off kilter. Yeah. So I think, like, now just, like, I feel like in a better, more, like, accepting place. So, like, okay, this isn't happening, but, like, we're going to try again. And obviously it's not going to be the timeline that I originally had expected, but it still hopefully will happen for us again. So, yeah, that's kind of where I've been at the last couple weeks. So,
yeah, I mean, I feel like miscarriage is so, like you said, it's so much more common than anyone would talk about. But I feel like people don't talk about it because there's this idea that, like, it's your fault. Yeah. And, I mean, to my knowledge, have never experienced a miscarriage. Like, I don't think I've ever experienced one. If I did, it was before I even knew I was pregnant. So, but, you know, there's so much, I mean, anything involving pregnancy, like, there's already so many emotions and hormones and expectations and hopes and fears that when it doesn't go the way you thought, there's always, like, that first thought of, like, did I do something wrong? Yeah. And I think that makes people, like, less willing or wanting to talk about it openly, because, you know, sometimes you have, like, you're asking yourself, like, could I have prevented this? Could I have stopped this? And most of the time the answer is no. Yeah. And that's hard to come to grips with.
Yeah. And I don't think I experienced that too much. I think so typically, you know, when people talk about pregnancy, they're like, oh, you shouldn't tell anyone for the first 12 weeks, you know, and that's kind of, and the reason people say that is because miscarriage is more common in the first 12 weeks. And originally, like, even the first time I was pregnant, in my head that made sense, right? But then I was like, but now, like, if I didn't tell anybody, then I would have had to either just not tell anybody what I was going through, so, like, I had no one to talk about it with, Or I would have had to tell people at the same time that I was pregnant and miscarried.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So I'm like, I don't feel like that concept of waiting for 12 weeks, like, I think that's a stupid concept because, like, you just feel so more, like, isolated and alone going through that rather than just telling people you were, like, yes, it sucks to go and tell everybody that you miscarried, but at the same time, like, it helps you not feel so, like, isolated through that experience.
Yeah.
Because, again, like I said, if you didn't tell anybody, you'd have to be telling people that you were pregnant and then weren't at the same time. And I feel like that's worse than just letting people know you were pregnant and then sharing your experience afterwards. And obviously, like, you have to go shout it to the world, you know, but at least, like, the people that you're close to and people that you see on a regular basis, I think, so that they can at least have some knowledge of, like, what you're going through, because it's very, like, because even throughout that week when I was miscarrying, like, I still had to show up for work. Like, I still had to do these things. And it's like, you just have to, like, go on with your life. And no one has any idea that you're, like, going through that. And it can be a very, you know, lonely experience. But, yeah.
Pregnancy, motherhood, all of it. Like, it's no matter what direction it goes, whether it's what you expected or not, whether you hoped or not, whether you feared or not, I am so incredibly grateful that you and I, like our friend group, we with our families, like, have the dynamic that we do, because one of the things I was thinking about a lot when I was, like, in the midst of, like, the worst part of the depression was, like, thank God I'm not alone.
Yeah.
Because there are so many women who have no choice but to navigate these things by themselves.
I know.
And, you know, I can confidently say I would not have survived if I was by myself. I think, you know, at least from the way you're describing your experience, like, having the ability to not hold it just to you made it a lot easier to navigate.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, you know, my heart breaks for any woman that's forced into a position where she has no one to lean on.
Yeah.
And I'm glad that we're moving in a direction where talking about these things isn't so taboo, that, you know, people feel like they can share the good and the bad, that they can help de-isolate people even just from hearing their experiences. Because, like, after waiting 9 months and having a wonderful birth experience, all things considered, to, like, have thoughts about my daughter dying is not something that, like, I ever fucking thought I would have.
Yeah.
And it scared the shit out of me. And I felt like I couldn't tell anyone about it because I was so ashamed.
Yeah.
And exactly like you were saying too, like, you just shared all this good news, and now the next time you talk to someone, you kind of have to give them the worst news.
Yeah.
And that can also make people feel like they don't want to share because you don't want to bring anyone down. You don't want to, you know, make things hard or admit that they're as hard as they are. And so, kind of like what we said in the beginning, like, hopefully one of the things that Danny and I loved about doing this podcast was just the ability to have these, like, authentic, open conversations, not only with each other, but just to maybe add a different lens to the narrative sometimes, and allow people to not feel like they're alone. Even if we've never met you in person, if you stumbled across this podcast and you feel a little bit less alone because you also have had these experiences or these thoughts, that's the way we need to move. And, you know, I'm grateful every day for the support systems that I have, not only in my family and my husband, but in the girlfriends that I have that were going through similar things and have never once judged me for, you know, the worst parts of things I can't control, you know? and, you know, we can lean on each other and support each other no matter what we're all going through. And so hopefully if you don't have that in person, hopefully you find that with, you know, somewhere.
Yeah. Whether it be strangers on the internet or especially a therapist. But yeah. I definitely think that social media, like, obviously is like the highlight reel of people's lives. And we don't always talk about these things. And sorry if we made you cry on this episode.
Don't worry, we both have cried as well.
Multiple times. But, you know, it won't always be so heavy. But, you know, there is a light at the end of the tunnel. And again, I think just sometimes, like Alyssa was saying, if you don't have anybody specifically to talk to, at least maybe hearing, you know, our stories and the things that we've struggled with can kind of make you feel less alone through your experiences. But
yeah. Social media, the internet in general, can be such a blessing and such a curse at the same time. Yeah. Because when you're in the lowest of the lows, when you're going through something that is traumatic or, you know, hard, and you see, oh, realistic day with my 3-week-old, and they're like cooing and happy and not crying a single time. You're like, well, what the fuck am I doing wrong that my baby is literally crying nonstop? And it's like exactly what you said. It's a highlight reel. Yeah. Like, they're not filming. They say it's a, quote, realistic day. Yeah. But they're not filming the hard parts. You know what I mean? Like, they're not putting up a baby that's crying nonstop. Yeah. They're not putting the red face screams and them crying and, like, all this stuff. But, like, unfortunately, that is way more realistic. Yeah. Like, that is way more common than the internet would lead you to believe. But on the flip side of that, one of the things that really helped me postpartum was, like, reading Reddit threads on postpartum depression and just feeling like I wasn't the only one to feel the way I was feeling, and that other people had found the light at the end of the tunnel. It gave me hope that, okay, this is hard right now, but I have some things I can do, and there's gonna be a better day ahead. Yeah. And so when you're in the thick of whatever you're experiencing, tread so carefully on the internet because it can help just as much as it can hurt. And, you know, I had to be really smart with I don't know if you found this too, but, like, I had to be really smart with the way I was consuming the internet in the throw of things, because I was getting so triggered by people sharing their highlight reels of, and, you know, the internet's too smart for us sometimes. As soon as I had a baby, my whole TikTok feed is now newborn stuff instead of pregnancy stuff. And so it was really hard for me to see all of those, like, happy, wonderful, smiley mothers and babies. Yeah. And I don't know if you felt that way too after you were, you know, going through your loss, is like, you're being reminded of what you don't have. And that can be really hard.
Yeah, I think in general, like, not just with this experience, but I think in general, I've tried taking a step back from social media. I just don't find that it brings me joy anymore. Like, I think it's time wasted just scrolling endlessly. Like, and don't get me wrong, I definitely still have my moments and days when I do sit there and just kind of scroll, but I'm very more particular about, like, I honestly don't watch a lot of, like, mother things on TikTok anymore, because also, too, like, the amount of, like, TikToks, I don't know about you, but the amount of TikToks of, like, babies or children, like, dying that have popped up on my TikTok of, like, and I'm just like, I don't need to hear about this. Yeah. Like, it's not going to help me in any way. No. Like, it's going to cause me more anxiety, more stress. It's just going to make me feel so bad for all these people. And I'm like, and I just can't bear that way right now. So when I go on TikTok, I'm going to bring my sourdough starter back, and I'm Googling gardening, and I'm starting a compost, and I'm Googling stuff like that, like, is just more informational based and less about, like, I don't need to see anything about motherhood. Like, I just don't need it. It's not going to help me in any shape or form right now, so I just stay away from it. So when I do go on TikTok, those are the things I'm, like, looking up. But honestly, like, I've been reading more. I've been, like, trying to, like, crochet more. Like, I'm trying to bake more. Like, I'm trying to do things that are actually bringing me more joy than just sitting on the computer and scrolling on my phone. Like, I don't go on Instagram anymore. Like, I just, like, sometimes I'll look at people's stories, but, like, I just don't spend my time on it anymore.
Yeah, which is honestly probably so smart.
Yeah.
And, you know, it's definitely, again, like I said, I've had to really throttle my usage as well, because for as much as TikTok has given me a lot of like cool information, the one thing I absolutely hate about it is that you can't control what you see.
Yeah.
Like, you're just fed it. Whereas at least with Instagram, you have a little bit more control over like, oh, I'm just going to go watch my friend's stories, or I chose to follow these accounts, so that's what I'm seeing. Yeah. So when I have gone on TikTok, I've been doing a lot more of just not the For You page, but like my following page.
Yeah.
Because then at least I know I've like actively chosen to follow those people, which means I know what kind of content I'm going to be fed.
Exactly.
And I think that's helped a lot, because I follow maybe like a handful of accounts that are motherhood based. One of them is like a pediatric OT, and so she talks about like baby milestones and like activities you can do during wake windows. That's been helpful for me. I follow like one or two women that are mothers, but they also do like other types of content. Yeah. And so it's not like all just mom stuff. It's also like one of them I think does like oh my god, my brain is broken.
I have no idea where you're going with this.
Sorry. I'm going to edit out that huge gap of silence where I could not think of any words. She does like homeopathic like recipes. Homeopathic's the word I couldn't think of. I'm like looking at my like herbs on the wall. I'm like, what is the word I'm looking for? So she does like gardening and baking, and there's like all like natural homeopathic like approaches to stuff. So yes, some of it's about like how she uses it with her kids, but it's not like all she talks about. Yeah. But then there's also a lot of people who they don't talk about being moms, and so like it gives it a nice reprieve. Yeah. As opposed to just being inundated with A, how you're not doing enough, B, how everything you're doing is wrong, C, how much worse it could be, how much better it could be, whatever the case is. So I've also been reading more. I've been watching more like vlog style things on YouTube, listening to just more music instead of watching stuff. Yeah. So yeah, I think, you know, all in all, I think that's one of the main reasons why we like this style of sharing, is because it can be authentic. And, you know, I'll put plenty of trigger warnings in the description of this episode. But, you know, you can choose to listen to it and come back to it, or, you know, listen to it when you need it, or listen to it when you're ready to hear it. We don't have to worry about mass appeal. It's about authenticity. Yeah. And like, these are real experiences that people really go through, and it's important that people feel heard and validated in what they're feeling, because neither one of us did anything wrong. Yeah. And yet we still felt like shit. And that's okay. Yeah. And I think, you know, you and I are both very well versed in mental health and big advocates of taking care of your mental health. But that also looks different for everyone. Yeah. So what worked for you might not work for me, and vice versa. And the more we talk about things, the more we share what has worked or what doesn't, it gives everyone else an opportunity to not just look at it through one lens and think the only way is medication or meditation or exercise, or everyone can find the path that works best for them. Absolutely. And as long as everyone's safe and healthy, there's plenty of right ways to be a mother. There's plenty of right ways to be a person. Yeah.
All right. Since we now unloaded our life, well, we hope you guys appreciated hearing our stories, and hopefully next time we share, kind of be more happy experiences and more lighthearted thoughts. We'll kind of come up with a topic for the next time that is a little bit more lighthearted.
Yeah, I think, you know, obviously
you have to have balance.
Yeah. We both went through some pretty major transitions in the last couple of weeks, and while those stories are important to share, and, you know, obviously we'll still check in about how our lives are going and share if there's like big updates. But I think hopefully this is like the biggest upheavals we'll have for a little bit.
I hope so.
And so we can start going back to maybe more of topic conversations about, you know, wellness things, or popular topics of conversation. We can do some more, fun things like the quizzes or the Am I the Assholes or unpopular opinions. Let us know what types of things you like hearing about. Hopefully we did a better job of advertising this episode, and so more people will hear it. But share with your friends and family, especially if you know someone that would benefit from hearing this conversation. You're not alone. No matter how much it might feel like it in that moment, no matter how much when you're in the thick of it, it feels like you have no one. If nothing else, like the two of us are rooting for you, and we know you can get through it. There's, like I said, there's thousands of right ways to be a human in this world, and we'll figure it out.
Yeah.
Every day.
That's all you can do.
So thanks so much for tuning in. We'll see you all soon.
Bye.